The morning rain fell softly against the hospital window, tracing delicate lines down the glass like the fragments of a forgotten memory. James sat quietly beside the bed, his eyes fixed on the pale face of the woman he loved. Machines hummed softly in the background, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor the only sound that reminded him she was still here, still alive. Diep had always been full of life. Her laughter could light up the coldest of days, and her eyes carried a quiet fire that drew James to her from the moment they met. But now, she lay motionless, her fragile hands resting lifelessly on the white blanket. The fever had come suddenly, one sleepless night of exhaustion, followed by days of high temperature and confusion. The doctors called it a severe viral infection, something that drained her body and clouded her mind. For James, it felt like watching the world he built with her collapse in silence. He hadn't left her side since she was admitted. Days turned into nights, and nights into endless waiting. He whispered to her about their dreams, their promises, the house they had planned to build near the fields. Sometimes he thought she heard him, because her fingers would twitch or her lips would move faintly, as if she were trying to remember. When Diep finally opened her eyes, the world seemed to pause. James stood, heart racing, ready to hold her hand, to tell her everything was going to be okay. But then she looked at him, not with recognition, not with love, but with confusion and fear. "Who are you?" she asked softly, her voice weak yet piercing enough to shatter his soul. James froze. The woman who had once called his name with warmth now couldn't even recall who he was. The doctor later explained that the illness had caused partial memory loss. Some memories might come back, or maybe none would. It was uncertain, but all James could hear was the echo of her voice, the emptiness behind those words. That night, as the hospital lights dimmed and the corridors fell quiet, James remained seated beside her bed, his hand gently covering hers. The world outside moved on, cars, people, the city. But for him, time stopped right there. He whispered to her, even though she didn't understand, "I'm still here, Diep. Even if you forget me, I'll help you remember." And in that silence, with the rain still falling beyond the window, a promise was reborn, fragile, painful, but unbreakable. Days turned into weeks, and James never left her side. The doctors suggested he take a break. But how could he? How could he walk away from the person who had once been his whole world, even if now she couldn't remember his name? Diep began to recover physically, though her eyes often carried a quiet confusion. She looked at James like one would look at a kind stranger, someone familiar in a way she couldn't explain. He smiled every time she glanced at him, though each smile carried a shadow of heartbreak. Every morning, James brought her flowers, the same white lilies she had once said smelled like peace. He told her small stories about a girl he once knew. He spoke of her favorite songs, the places they went together, the dreams they used to share. Diep listened, polite but distant, not realizing the girl in his stories was herself. Sometimes, she would ask, "Why do you care so much about that girl?" And James would only answer with a quiet smile, "Because she taught me what love means." He never told her the truth, not yet. He didn't want to burden her fragile heart with the weight of forgotten promises. Instead, he tried to rebuild everything, piece by piece. He took her to the garden where they used to walk hand in hand. He played her favorite song on the old radio, and when she frowned, trying to recall why the melody made her chest tighten, he silently prayed that one day her heart would remember what her mind could not. People around him whispered that he was foolish, that love cannot survive in one memory alone. But James believed otherwise. He believed that love, real love, did not need to be remembered to exist. It simply was. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hospital garden, Diep turned to him. There was something softer in her eyes, a flicker of trust. "When you tell stories about that girl," she said quietly, "I feel warm inside. I don't know why." James's throat tightened. He wanted to reach out, to hold her, to tell her that the warmth she felt was the echo of their love, still alive, still burning, even beneath the ashes of lost memory. But instead, he just nodded. Maybe, he whispered, "Your heart is remembering for you." That night, As she drifted into sleep, James sat beside her once more. The room was filled with the scent of lilies and the hum of quiet hope. He knew this would be a long journey, one filled with uncertainty and pain. But for her, he would walk it all over again. Because love, he realized, wasn't just about being remembered. It was about staying, even when you're forgotten. The days passed softly, like pages of an unfinished book. Diep was no longer confined to the hospital. She could walk again, breathe the outside air, and smile without pain. Yet something inside her still felt missing, a void she couldn't name. Sometimes when she looked at James, her chest tightened in a strange ache. He was always there, gentle, patient, and steady, as if waiting for something only she could give. She didn't know why his presence comforted her so deeply, or why her heart would race whenever he smiled. It felt like déjà vu, as though she had known him in another life. One afternoon, she wandered into the hospital garden alone. The sky was pale blue, the wind carrying the scent of blooming jasmine. A man approached, tall, confident, dressed in a crisp suit. His name was Min, a friend of James's from the business world. But to Diep, he was a stranger with kind eyes and a careful smile. "I've heard about you," Min said, handing her a small bouquet. "You were very special to James." Diep blinked, uneasy. "Was?" she asked. Min hesitated, his tone soft. "He doesn't tell you, does he? About everything that happened before you lost your memory. That night." The words echoed in her mind like whispers in the dark. Everything that happened before. What was he hiding from her? Why did she feel that James's silence carried more than love? Perhaps guilt, perhaps sorrow. The next morning, she confronted James, her voice trembling. "Who was I to you, really? And what did I mean before I forgot?" James's eyes softened, but he couldn't answer right away. He wanted to tell her everything, how they had fought for each other, how she had once called him her forever. But he also feared that forcing the past onto her might hurt more than heal. He began, then stopped, looking away. "You were someone who changed my life." His voice was calm, but Diep could hear the pain behind it. The mystery only deepened inside her heart. In the following days, Min began visiting more often, offering to take her out, showing her photos of the company, places she might remember. With him, things felt easier, simple, new. But every time she saw James waiting quietly in the distance, something in her ached. She didn't know why his silence hurt more than anyone's words. Late one night, unable to sleep, Diep walked to the garden again. The moonlight spilled over the path where James once pushed her wheelchair. Whispering stories of their past, she stood there, her hand trembling as flashes of images came. Laughter in the rain, a promise under the stars, the warmth of his hand in hers. Her breath caught. "James," she whispered. But when she turned, he wasn't there. He was standing far away, watching her quietly, afraid that if he stepped closer, she might shatter again. He saw the confusion in her eyes, the longing she didn't yet understand, and it broke him. Because love was returning to her heart, but memory was still far behind. James whispered to himself, "Even if you never remember me, I'll wait until your heart does." And under that silver moonlight, two souls stood apart, bound by love, separated by memory, waiting for fate to turn its final page. The first rain of spring came quietly that morning, the kind that carried both sorrow and renewal. Diep stood by the window of her small apartment, watching the raindrops race down the glass. Her heart was heavy with feelings she couldn't name. Weeks had passed since Min stopped visiting. James still came, always with the same gentle smile, always asking if she needed anything. But she began to notice how tired he looked, the dark circles beneath his eyes, the way he hid his pain behind kindness. Every time he left, the silence he left behind seemed to echo louder. One night, while sorting through the small box of personal things the hospital had returned to her, Diep found a silver locket. It was old, the edges slightly worn. When she opened it, she found a tiny picture, her and James, standing together by a river, laughing like two people who had once owned the world. Inside the locket, a folded piece of paper lay hidden, yellowed by time. She unfolded it slowly, her hands trembling. "If one day you forget me, the note said. "I'll make you fall in love with me all over again." The words hit her like lightning. Images began to flash, the sound of his laughter, the warmth of his arms, the tears they had shared, the promises whispered beneath the stars. Her breath caught as pain and love flooded back all at once. Memories came crashing in, the day she got sick, his sleepless nights beside her, his voice whispering through the darkness. "I'll help you remember," she gasped, clutching her chest, as if her heart could barely hold everything that returned at once. "James," she whispered through tears.
Without thinking, she ran out into the rain, barefoot and breathless, her heart pounding like thunder. The city lights blurred as she searched for him, the man who had waited, suffered, and loved her beyond memory itself. She found him at the old hospital garden, standing under the same tree where he used to tell her stories. He turned when he heard her footsteps, his eyes widening in disbelief as she ran straight into his arms.
"I remember," she sobbed. "I remember everything, the rain, the songs, our promises. You never left me, did you?" James didn't speak. He just held her tighter, his face buried in her wet hair, his tears mixing with the rain. "I told you," he whispered softly, his voice trembling. "I'd help you remember." She looked up at him, eyes shining with both pain and love. "You did more than that," she said. "You loved me enough to wait." The rain kept falling, washing away the months of loss, fear, and silence round them. The garden seemed alive again, flowers trembling, the scent of lilies in the air. In that moment, the world was no longer about what they had lost, but what they had found again, a love that had endured even when memory failed. Diep pressed her forehead against his chest and whispered, "Let's start again. Not from the past, but from now." James smiled, the kind of smile that carried both an ending and a beginning. And as the rain softened into mist, they stood there, two souls who had forgotten, remembered, and finally found their way back, proving that true love doesn't just survive time or memory, it survives everything. The story of Diep and James teaches us that true love is not bound by memory, time, or circumstance. Even when everything fades, names, moments, promises, love can remain quietly alive in the heart. James's unwavering devotion reminds us that love is not only about being remembered, it is about staying, even when you are forgotten. He never forced Diep to recall the past. Instead, he chose patience, kindness, and faith, believing that the heart remembers what the mind cannot. Diep's journey shows that sometimes we lose parts of ourselves, but those who truly love us help us find our way back. When she finally remembered, it wasn't because of time or medicine, but because of love, a love that had never stopped reaching out to her soul. From their story, we learn that love is not proven through words, but through endurance. It is not about holding on tightly, but about standing quietly beside someone. No matter how much life changes, true love does not need to be remembered to exist. It only needs to be felt.